Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal, of course, is to show that everything is figure-outable. Today's guest expert is Kim Bohr. Kim is an author, an in-demand speaker, and CEO of the Innovare Group, a firm known for diagnosing and repairing organizational disconnects, helping leaders face the fact that a solid strategy won't survive poor execution. Her book, Successes, Failures, and Lessons Learned, is a 12-week guide professional journal designed to foster ownership and accountability over performance, execution, and career development. And today, she is our modern leadership guest expert. Kim, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful, Jake. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. And we had a few minutes to chat right before we hit record, and you have so much interesting stuff going on, and you've got your hands and doing a whole bunch of different things right now. But before we get into all of that, give us a little background on a personal level. Who is Kim?
Yeah, so I am, my passion is in helping organizations grow. And the key pivotal point to that is through leadership. And when I was young in my career of leading, I really didn't have good role models, if you will, in leading effectively. And so it really launched me on this journey of what does it look like? I've always described myself as a student of business, so I've always been really intrigued in business dynamics, mergers, acquisitions, like just all of these really interesting things, knowing that you have to have highly effective leaders to do it well. And yes, you can grow a business and have poor leaders, but you hit a cap, you hit a ceiling. And so as I went through my career early on, I really struggled to find strong leadership to look up to in my own circle. And so I had been opportunity to lead for the first time, and I was not very good at it. I had so much interest and passion in leading, and when I really started leading, I just couldn't do it very well. And I was asking for feedback. I wasn't getting the results I wanted. The leaders I had at the time couldn't give me really tangible feedback. And what I realized in hindsight was that it was really because they themselves were inexperienced. They didn't have strong leadership skills or training. And so it set me on this course of trying to figure out how could I solve for this, right? Because I didn't want to have a team that didn't like me, or really just didn't respect me, I should say, and didn't want to be there and want to perform. So at the time, Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, was out. And I found that book, and that was life-changing. And I called the firm, and I engaged with one of his principals at the time as an executive coach. And that was a real game changer. We did work that brought the team into play. We did work that then allowed me to take myself on, as a leader, and to really turn the business around and to turn the team around to where they wanted to be a part of what we were doing, and they wanted to work with me. And so that was a moment that I don't believe we ever stop developing as leaders. I believe that's always going to be ongoing.
I hope we don't stop developing as leaders. I hope that we're always continuing. Now, Kim, give us a little idea. What time period was this? Like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago? When was this?
This was probably almost 25 years ago.
Okay. And 25 years ago, we had leaders in the companies that you were working with, people that you were looking up to as leaders, but weren't giving you the leadership guidance that you needed. Give us a little idea. How were those people? And this was not just unique to your situation. I mean, this was common at that time. How were these leaders getting into this leadership role without the leadership skills that we talk about today? What was the environment that allowed leaders to get promoted up to this point?
Well, I think there's two things. I think there's stuff that existed then that's less so now, but I think there's stuff that existed then that's still strong today. So one is solely by performance, right? So if you performed well, if you were a high performer, you automatically then naturally would become a leader, even if you really weren't wanting to lead people, or you just maybe that really isn't where your strengths were, or where you even wanted to develop into. So I think that idea of promoting from just solo performance, and that still exists today. And I think that's one of those challenges and gaps.
And I'm glad that you said that because, one of the things that I've seen is we often promote people to their highest level of incompetence. So somebody's great at sales and we say, hey, let's make him a sales manager. Somebody's great at marketing and we say, hey, let's make him a marketing manager. Well, the skills to be great at marketing or the skills to be great at sales or the skills to be great in one position don't necessarily translate to the other. And often what we do is we say, oh, you were great at sales, now go be great over there, without giving them the coaching or the background or the experience necessary to develop into that leader.
Absolutely. And that's still, unfortunately, that's still persistent today. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges as organizations, to realize that we've got to look at that very differently. I think the other thing back then, too, was there was still more of a top-down, some old ideas of leadership, of hierarchical type of leadership, of, you're promoting, and there's very specific steps you have to move through. And clearly we've really shifted in that dramatically on all areas there. And I think that's something that we have different challenges now, right? But back then that was very much still very, very common.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. It was almost like a king ruling his kingdom where, he, and in a lot of cases, we were talking about he's, especially 25 years ago, and he would come in and say, this is the way I want it done. And there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for boots on the ground people to say, I'm seeing it a little different being out on the front lines. And I'm glad to hear that you've seen it shifting and changing. Why do you think it's shifting and changing? Why do you think that we're being more flat as organizations, where we're listening to those on the ground more than we did in the past?
Well, I think it's coming from a couple of different angles. I think, if you consider that book title of Marshall Goldsmith, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, I think that continues to ring true even organizationally. What we had to do when our global economy looked very different then has dramatically shifted. And I think that's a big piece of it. I think we also have realization that the dynamics that men and women bring together into organizations are different and complementary, and we could really be a much more scalable global organization, strong, much stronger entity if we're really leveraging both. And I think we have been able to open up different doors and shifting opinions where women are just able to make a much stronger case. And many men are there to say we need more women to be a part of this. So I think that's absolutely shifted dramatically from where we were. That term "good old boys club" was still extremely relevant back in the time when I was leading, and real, very real. And so that's very different now in most industries, most of what we see. It doesn't mean there's still not challenges, but it's much, much less of that anymore.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. In certain industries, we still see a lot of this, what may be termed patriarchal type of leadership organization, particularly in these established fields. I do a lot of work with lawyers, doctors, dentists, some of these professional service firms. I think even to the degree of looking at, janitorial companies and plumbing service companies, you still see that a little bit, but I'm glad to hear that it's changing. And one of the things that I think is changing is this idea that more and more people are accepting coaching. And I look back 25 years ago, you hired a coach, you brought in the Goldsmith team, which has been tremendous in your growth and development. And I think, you look back 25 years ago, that was very uncommon. It was almost like something that you didn't want to let people know, hey, I hired a coach, somebody's helping me get better. Today, that is less and less the case. More people are willing to say, yeah, of course I get coaching. It's how I get better. So tell me about the shift that you've seen since the time that you started accepting coaching to now the point where you do a lot of this yourself.
I think what's shifted, as you said, is there's a mindset shift, right? So there was a point at which I still come across this, but it's less so. But there was a point at which people thought, well, because I now hold this title, or because I now have started this business, I'm supposed to also know all these things about leadership, right? Everything, right? It's just like it's supposed to have been imparted the morning I woke up. And that's just not the case. And I think as we've been able to work with people on mindset, it's more around, having a partnership of somebody to help share ideas with, helping to understand, see the blind spots, see the corners where you're not seeing, help you to, at your core, if you're not getting the results you want, and you're not happy with that, then what kind of things can you do to shift and be different? So much of coaching does start to come into some places of vulnerability, but it also, as you grow in your leadership career, or as you grow as an owner inside an organization or a firm, what tends to happen is it becomes very lonely at the top. And so the other aspect of coaching is really to help you have somebody that can hear you when you don't necessarily get the same kind of feedback as you grow in a leadership role, or as you take on, a CEO or an ownership role. And you need that type of feedback, and in ways that start to become extremely filtered as you move up. And I think that's something that people are starting to see, the connection to the business results and to the bottom line, right? Anytime we can make a case around something to improved performance that impacts, your profit, then that starts to pique people's interest versus it feeling like something that's just squishy. And that's really, I believe, a biggest shift of what we're seeing is there really is a tie to your performance in your organization.
And this is such a huge point because it's lonely at the top. And when you think about being a business owner, and it's hard to talk to your employees, your direct reports, about what's going on, what you're facing, the challenges that you're facing. It's hard to talk to your spouse or your loved ones about it because they're not in the same arena. They're not seeing it and the same background. So it's wonderful to put yourself together with other CEOs or other leaders or others that are going through similar challenges and just talk about ideas. This is where, almost 100 years ago when Napoleon Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich, and he talked about mastermind groups. And what he was talking about is gathering like-minded individuals that are going through similar challenges that they can talk to each other, not give each other necessarily solutions, but give each other ideas. And so I love this. Now, Kim, one of the things that we talk a lot about, and you talk a lot about, is high growth and growing your business, setting goals and expectations and reaching those goals. But there's some things we need to avoid, mistakes that we need to avoid as we look towards high growth. And I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about 7 mistakes that we can avoid during a high growth opportunity. Sound like a plan?
Absolutely.
All right, let's jump in. Number 1.
So number 1 is really understanding your talent mix. So looking at, do we have the right people in the right seats for this, where we are in at this time of our growth. So really understanding, what's our talent mix.
Now, is this kind of Jim Collins is talking about, okay, we've got the bus, that's our company. We got the driver of the bus, that's our leader. We got all these seats on the bus, and we need to make sure that we got the right people sitting in the right seats, not just the right people on the bus. That doesn't mean we just have to have the people in the company, but we got to have them doing the right roles, sitting in the right seats in order to make the company grow. Is that what I'm hearing?
It is. And it's even, it even goes a little bit deeper than that, because what it really starts to look at is, do we have people that truly will enjoy doing this particular type of work? They could be technically savvy on it. They could have the right resume skills, but the level of what they actually enjoy is very, very different. And so that actually brings me to, when I talk about number 2, it's in line with this idea of people can be what we like to call eligible. They can be technically savvy, but if they are not well suited to the position, if they do not enjoy doing these particular things, they will burn out or your company will suffer. And so really understanding that level of connection to the actual work, and really we talk about it from predictive analytics, is a really important piece to understand. Otherwise, you're just filling people into positions that will ultimately not work out.
And this is a real challenge for leaders because I think our potential employees, as they come in, as they interview, they get excited about the job. And maybe we have this mental block where we block out all the things we don't like, and we just look at it and we go, I think this job would be amazing. I want this job. I'm going after it. And it's hard for us as leaders to identify what's just passion in the moment and what's passion long term. Do you have any tips for us for kind of identifying when a candidate has passion for the moment versus long term?
Yeah, it's, really what you're trying to do is that I think that's one of the biggest traps to fall into is how charismatic somebody might be. And it could be very authentic, right? And sometimes we don't necessarily as employers always give the ugly side of the work. We don't always say, well, let me just tell you though what the day really is going to be like, because there's going to be some really tough days. And so we fall in love with each other, if you will, from a place of just all the strengths, but we don't necessarily talk about that opposite end. And so what's really important is to, first of all, I always encourage people to try to use the data analytics tool if you can inside that hiring process or even inside your process internally to promote, because you have data, and data is something that you can take emotion out of, and you can look and say, well, what is this person really telling me they prefer to do, and what do they tell me they really strongly prefer not to do? And if our business needs that strongly prefer not to do stuff, then this person isn't going to be right, even though we really think they would be a fun colleague to have. And so not getting stuck into that trap of being wooed. So if you can use tools that have that data, predictive analytics, that's absolutely the right way to go. If you can't, you really want to try to be asking more of those behavioral based type of questions that can dig a little deeper, that can say, tell me about a time when you when something didn't work and what did you have to do? Help me understand when you had to convince somebody of something that that wasn't going your way. Just there's really strong questions like that where you can get a sense of how people handle these other type of situations. It's, and get an idea of, okay, it's not just about, I think they can do the job. It's now about where are they going to really engage and enjoy doing the job.
And this takes us to number 3. So what is the mistake number 3 that we need to avoid?
So it goes into throwing out your process. So when we're in high growth times, a lot of times what happens is that people actually, you just want to get, butts in seats, and we just need to fill the position. Just get them in quickly. And so we start to look the other way.
Fast that sometimes we cut the corner a little bit, try to shortcut because we just need help.
We just need help. And, it might vary in different industries around how length of time of somebody to get them in the door and to get them ramped up. But if you've given up the process that has worked when times are steady, just because you feel like you need to fill that seat, you're inevitably going to set yourself back, because more likely than not, that person won't work out. Or maybe several of them, if you hire them at once, maybe you get 1 out of 3 that work. And you've set yourself back even further, not to mention, the costs that you've incurred. So just stick to that process. Don't let that process, flop. Make sure that you're really adhering to it, even when you feel like you have the pressure of trying to put people in those seats.
And one of the skills of leadership is to see before you have the need, see the need coming. And I often talk about surfers, and there's surfers that stand on the beach and they wait for the great waves. But by the time they see the great waves, grab their board, run out into the ocean, paddle out, the waves have passed. Those who are in it, who can feel the current of the ocean, know when the big waves are coming, and they're already out there. And the same thing needs to happen with our leaders. They need to kind of see ahead of time. If you know it takes 3 months to go through the hiring process, onboard somebody, you need to anticipate 3, 4, 5 months in advance that we're going to have a need, and start making those efforts today before it's too late. So that's number 3. What's our 4th?
So our 4th is really to honing in on making sure that you continue to keep your network strong during times of growth. So what often happens is that individuals and organizations forget to keep building that network, and they start to then want to turn to the network during the downtime to say, okay, we're looking for somebody. We're trying to grow our business and want to increase our, move into a different sector of the market. And if you haven't been thinking about that during your high growth time because you're running so fast, you're really going to be caught off guard when when the market shifts, because it inevitably will. And so a lot of it's really focused on keep that network of the kind of clients you want to be working with strong. Think ahead of what is the client mix when times shift, and then really about what kind of people do we want on our team, and how can we be networking to find those individuals, so when an opportunity opens up, we're not scrambling. We really are looking at people that maybe we've started to get to know in different scenarios.
And if you feel like your business is a roller coaster where you're seeing highs and lows and highs and lows, this could be a mistake that you need to look at in your business. We often see that we see this in marketing and sales. We'll put a lot of effort into marketing, and then we'll have a lot of sales. So then we'll go and have to do production, which during production, we slack off on marketing and sales so that it gets slow again. So then we re-pump up marketing and sales. And we find ourselves on this constant roller coaster of really heavy marketing, really heavy production, really heavy marketing, really heavy production. And what you're saying is, if we continue to work at a steady pace, networking, developing these relationships, or as Harvey Mackay would say, dig your well before you're thirsty. If we continue to do this, then in the times of growth, even after we hit our peak of growth, we'll still have those relationships available to continue to grow. So that's 4. Where are we at with 5?
So where we're at with 5 is really recognizing that inevitably we go through cycles. We're going to go through growth cycles. So just recognize that what goes up must come down, and don't lose this momentum around what these, that the fact that everything is cyclical. So the more that you can stay engaged and the more you can be looking ahead, the better.
And everything that we just talked about, waves, and this is the same with business. There's going to be big waves, there's going to be small waves, they're going to continue to come. But you as a business leader, your job is to identify when the big ones are coming and be ready for those, and understand that there are going to be small ones and be prepared to weather through those as well. So that's number 5. Where do we go with 6, Kim?
So where we go with 6 is really looking at avoiding the temptation of asking for feedback. So we really think about it from a lot of times, as we were mentioning before, right? As we grow as leaders, we tend to not always get feedback that's unfiltered, but we also often don't ask for it. And so we want to make sure we're looking at asking for feedback, and we're always checking in that level. The other thing we want to do is make sure we're giving feedback. So when we feel more stressed, when we feel like, things aren't going as well, we can perhaps tend to be more critical. What I'm suggesting here in high growth times is that we've got to be giving constructive and positive feedback. And I will tell you that a lot of times people think giving positive feedback is really easy. And what I often have to do is pause for them and say, just a minute, let's talk about positive feedback. It's not just you did a good job. Positive feedback is actually around dissecting what it was that you observed. It might be that you observed how somebody handled a really sticky client or customer situation, and you want to step back and say, hey, that was really fantastic how you were able to not only solve the customer's problem, but you really de-escalated the situation. You really seem to have a gift for that. I want you to know I noticed it and it really mattered. That's a very different type of feedback. And it's a feedback that people can grasp onto and know that they can do more of that versus the just, well, good job, great. What does that mean? What do I do with it?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. What a tremendous lesson there. Our final one, number 7.
So it's really letting these processes and, your key performance indicators lapse. So again, when we're talking about being in this high growth time, oftentimes we find ourselves not adhering to even our own indicators inside our business. We talked about it from a hiring perspective, but it's also really relevant from how we manage our teams and things, and we start to look the other way. And what we have to do is really make sure we don't do that, because it'll come back and bite us when the markets shift, when our businesses are shifting. We want to look at those indicators and see what trends they might be telling us, so we can be looking ahead.
So let me see if I understand this one. I have these KPIs as a business leader, as an owner of my company, but because we're growing at so quick of a rate, we're not reevaluating what they are, and maybe some of them that are important are being overlooked, and we kind of sweep them under the rug saying, well, we may not be meeting our KPI in this arena, but we're over exceeding it in this, and therefore we're just going to let it go. Is that what the mistake is?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it could be even on your people side. It could be that what we often see is that just because times are really good, people assume that everybody's going to stay where they're at. And when we're in really high growth situations, the markets become so rich, your talent can easily be taken away. So are you looking at those indicators where you could lose talent at a critical time and all of a sudden have a gap in your business? Are you looking at, as you said, one sector of the business is doing great, but the other isn't, and we're just going to ignore why that's happening. And so we really have to be thinking consistently across the board around what are the key metrics, including the metrics that could have us having talent loss at a time when it would really set us back, several months to regain that momentum.
Kim, this has been an incredible conversation. I love this idea of these 7 mistakes to avoid. I see myself needing to improve in all 7. I think there's things that I can do and a lot of our listeners need to do over the next weeks and months to prepare ourselves to be better leaders. Thank you for taking the time to walk through that. At this point, I want to shift gears slightly and talk about a section we call Learning from Leaders. Are you prepared?
Absolutely. Happy to take this on.
Very nice. So our first question then, is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table? What are you reading?
So I am currently reading a book that had been given to me recently called Immunity to Change. I've just started it, but it's focused on how to overcome and unlock the potential in yourself and your organization. And it's really focused on agile learning and adaptive learning, which I think is something that in this day and age, we all have to be very, very comfortable with.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a buzzword that we're hearing a lot out there. And if you want to be a leader, you need to take a look at some of these books that are talking about this agile learning and JIT learning and all of this stuff that's so important right now. So tremendous book recommendation. Our next one then is Your Leadership Superpower.
So my leadership superpower is asking questions, getting very curious from a place where I am not passing judgment or anything, or blame. I'm just truly being curious to ask, to understand, so I can understand the other person's perspective and really try to just see it from their lens.
And it's amazing, Kim, the growth that you've had in 25 years, because we started this conversation basically talking about that you weren't getting the feedback, you weren't getting the lessons, the teaching, the things that you needed to become a leader because the people that were leading didn't have those skills. And now here we are today, and asking questions is such a great leadership talent, superpower skill that allows you not only to get the feedback and give the feedback that you need, but also to learn and grow and continue to learn as a leader. So great superpower. Our next question is your motivational philosophy, quote, or mantra, something that you live by.
So I am a huge fan of William Ernest Henley's Invictus poem. And the piece that I love the most that I will just briefly recite is the last 2 lines. And it says, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And I think that's always where I look at my life and how I lead if it's to be, it's up to me. And that's an incredibly powerful poem that I've always been drawn to.
And I think, Kim, that separates the leaders from the followers. Leaders are willing to stand up and say, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. Followers are there to say, well, if it's easy, I'll do it. Otherwise, can somebody else jump in? So I love that mantra. Our final question before we let you go today, Kim, is the book that you most often recommend or gift to friends, family, and colleagues.
So it's going to go back to the Marshall Goldsmith book, and it's one I've been really highly recommending those who haven't touched on it, go back and look at. And it's really his original book of What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's just an incredibly well-written book to help people shift their perspective of where they need to go next.
Well, this has been an amazing episode of the podcast. So much actionable information. I love going through lists. I love talking about these 7 mistakes to avoid. Kim, before we let you go, how can we find out more about you?
So I've set up a landing page that's specific to your listeners, and there's 3 complimentary offers. Nothing's gated, so they can immediately take action to access those. So the address is theinnovaregroup.com/MLP. So that's and then INNOV as in Victor, aregroup.com/M as in Mary, L as in Larry, P as in Paul. And on there, the 3 offers are really for anybody, whether you're leading, whether you're a business owner, or whether you're an independent contributor. You can benefit from all these. So the first one is a downloadable checklist, which gives also a little bit of context inside each of the elements. And it's around 7 reasons most strategic plans fail. We spend so much time on strategy planning. This really gets into why might something not pull through. So whether that's at your own individual level or at your larger organization level, great tips in there that anybody can get some insight to. The second is a short video I put together that allows you to look at how do you introduce an idea or roll out a plan of which you need to get everybody bought into and brought along. So it's a 3-step video, again, valuable to any level of individual, and it takes you through the steps of where we've been, where we are, where we're going, and how to make those connections so that people are engaged. And then the final offer is if anybody wants to continue the conversation with me, there's a link to schedule 30 minutes with me, and we can talk more about the business challenges that anyone's facing inside the organization. And so those are the 3 that I want to make available to all your listeners today.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Kim. We will link that up on the show notes so they can just go to the show notes for this episode, click on the link, and go right to that very generous offer. Kim, you truly are a modern leader. Thank you for being this week's guest expert.
Jake, thank you for having me. And I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been wonderful.
All right, my friends, and thank you to Kim for coming on. I felt like this was such an actionable episode. I really love going through lists, checklists, these ideas of, okay, what are the 7 things, the mistakes that I need to avoid in my leadership journey? And I think each one of them, as I mentioned in the episode, each one of them, I know I can improve on. I know that there's something that I can do. I love this idea, number 3 in her list, don't throw out your process, right? What got you here is not going to get you there, but the process, the foundation, the base that you've created for yourself and for your business, that is going to help you have the solid foundation to go to the next level. Don't throw out your process. What worked, what is working, don't throw it out as you grow. Make sure that you stay focused on what's important in your business and in your community and with your employees, with those who work for you, with your followers. All right, my friends, everything that we talked about in this episode, including the ways to get Kim's special offer, is to go to jakeacarlson.com/ML178. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. And remember, everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.